Well, she calls herself the Queen of Canada and is known for spreading conspiracy theories.
Hello, Canada. I'm Ramona Didulo. I'm the founder and leader of Canada First. As of February this year, 2021, I am the head of state and commander in chief of Canada, the Republic. In case you're wondering who appointed me as the head of state and commander in chief of the Republic of Canada, the people who appointed me are the White Hats and the U.S. military.
Ramona Didulo, currently living here in Saskatchewan. It was a shock to many people in Richmound, a community of just 154 people when she moved into town. 9 months later, she's still there, and many say the community has never been more divided. So today on the show, we get an update on what it's like to be neighbors with what many call a cult. We'll speak to the mayor of Richmound, RCMP, and an investigative freelance journalist who's written about the so-called Queen of Canada and her followers. Now, if you live in Richmound, we'd like to hear your perspective on things today, so you can give us a call at 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, Rachel Brown is an investigative freelance journalist who recently wrote that in-depth piece for The Walrus. It's called How the Queen of Canada and Conspiracy Theorists Splintered a Small Town. That small town is Richmound, which is located about a 4-hour drive west of Regina. Rachel joins us now. Welcome to Blue Sky, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Leisha.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can set the scene a little bit for us. You know, what is the situation currently in Richmound? Who's there and where are they living?
Well, as you mentioned, the group is still very much there, about 9 months after they first landed in Richmound last September. And they've been staying, well, I should say, the Queen, so-called Queen, Ramona Didulo, has been there with a group of her inner circle. They've been living at what was the former school grounds right in the middle of Richmound. They've been living there since they arrived, and they've become more entrenched in the school. It's sort of become their headquarters, their compound. I was told recently that they started painting the outside of the school this very vibrant purple, which is her so-called royal colors. You can see that purple on the flag that she has. So Romana and her followers are still very much in Richmound, and a lot of people, a lot of locals were thinking that she would leave during the harsh winter, that maybe they wouldn't be able to withstand it. They stayed. By the time this spring came around, people were hoping that they would leave because the weather warmed up, but they're still there.
So what got you interested in this story that really does center now on Richmound?
I cover religion and belief in general, and I'm very fascinated in particular with fringe belief systems and ideologies and why people like Romana become who they are, become leaders of this type. And I'm also interested in what draws people to these types of conspiracy theories or fringe systems of belief. And I saw last fall that Romana came to Richmound, and by the end of last year, around December, there was some news coverage that she and her group had left the school for a farm outside of town. And there was sort of this idea that perhaps she had left, but then I looked into it a little bit, and it was clear that they were still very much in Richmound. And so I really wanted to hear from people about what it was like to live in this very small town with this cult that's been described, well, Romana's been described as one of the most active conspiracy theorists in North America. It's pretty astounding. And so I really wanted to get a sense of what it was like living with this conspiracy theorist, this cult, right in your backyard.
I want to hear about that too, but maybe first we should explain to people exactly who is Romana. Like what are the conspiracy theories that she's spouting? Just to give us a bit of her backstory.
And in terms of Romana's backstory, we don't know too much about her life story. What we do know is that she immigrated to Canada from the Philippines around 1990 when she was a teenager. She's in her 50s now, and she came to British Columbia. In her adult life, she went to run a recruiting firm for the oil and gas sector. And she really didn't have any sort of public profile to speak of until around the end of 2020 or so, when she started this fringe political party called the Canada First Party, which really kind of borrowed language from the US Republican Party, talking about draining the swamp in Ottawa. But she kind of abandoned that Canada First Party once by the end of 2020, when the originator of the QAnon conspiracy theory movement had sort of stopped posting online. And there was this type of power vacuum. My former colleague at Vice, Mac Lamoureux, covered this a lot at the time and described Didulo as stepping into that power vacuum. And then she was sort of embraced by QAnon influencers and really took off from there and started perpetuating her own take on this type of ideology and conspiracy theory.
So what is her own take? I mean, some of the things that I've heard and kind of doing some digging online, not that I've done much because you can really go down quite a rabbit hole, but, she tells people not to pay their taxes. I mean, she's threatened violence. And I think most people would associate her with being a major part of the convoy and the anti-vaccine movement. So what is Ramona, what is her take right now on some of those theories that people might be somewhat familiar with?
I've heard experts describe her ideology as a mix of the sovereign citizen movement, QAnon, as well as anti-vaccine rhetoric. So there's this kind of deep-rooted paranoia towards government institutions. So you hear her, she says that she's the one true ruler of Canada. So she's part of this belief system that believes that our systems of government and rule of law is illegitimate, and that our systems of law and the things that we do as citizens to participate in society don't apply to them. So she tells people, you don't have to pay your income tax, you don't have to pay your hydro bills, you don't have to pay your car bills. And there's sort of a whole range of other types of more bizarre aspects to her ideology. She claims to have received recognition from Vladimir Putin, from Donald Trump. She believes that she has communed with aliens and that she has said she's a divine being sent to Earth to fulfill a spiritual mission. So there's a whole range of sort of a mishmash of ideologies here. But the real life impact that we see is that people believe what she's saying. They believe they don't have to pay income tax. They believe they don't have to pay their hydro bills. And people are losing their homes. People are losing their quality of life because they're believing in this mythology.
Why do they believe her? What have you learned about the people who follow her?
That's a good question. I think that there's a lot to do with what we see being perpetuated online on social media. Ramona and her group are very prominent on apps like Telegram. So they're pushing out this ideology that people are latching onto for whatever reason, whether it's reaching them at a time of desperation in their life, this sort of unwillingness to engage with proper, legitimate government structures. So there's a whole range of reasons why people latch onto these types of theories. But I think it also is because her ideology came about during the peak of the pandemic, when there was a deep-rooted distrust of medical authorities, of government authorities. So it really was the perfect storm for someone like Ramona to come in and start spouting these types of conspiracy theories and ideologies that were really taking off online, especially at that time.
And how widespread are her followers? Like, we're obviously talking today because of Richmound being right here in Saskatchewan, and we'll get to how she's impacted the community. But just how far-reaching are some of her? Just how is this global? Like, are people following her from around the world?
There is suggestion that over the years, people from around the world have been following her and her ideology. There was a chapter that popped up in Germany recognizing her as the Queen of Canada and so forth. And at the height of her popularity, perhaps in the earlier days of the pandemic, 2021, that sort of thing, there was suggestion, experts have suggested that her Telegram following was around 70,000. So there are tens of thousands of people at least following her online, and perhaps that number translated to tens of thousands of people in general. Now we're in the middle of 2024, and there's a suggestion that her followers are on the decline. I've seen numbers to suggest that perhaps there's only a few hundred or maybe several hundred left.
But yet, yeah, okay, so the town of Richmond only has 154 people. So when someone like Ramona comes to town, what is the impact of that?
It's huge, because when you have all of these RVs roll into town one day, everyone knows each other in Richmond, so they can't help but be struck or notice this caravan of RVs and trucks and other vehicles that they've never seen before pull into town and pull into the school grounds. That's very visible. It's right there in the middle of town. And it was also a place where many of the people in town went to school. They worked there. So the school is sort of this beloved, or had been this beloved place. And so to see this group, a large group in a town of only 100, 150 people, it's about 10% or a bit less of the total population. So they were shocked, scared, and also very uncertain about what the impact of this group could be. And it's also disheartening, because the town that they loved has now become this hub and this place where this harmful rhetoric is being spewed right next door.
Have there been violent threats? I'm wondering about that side of things, because we are going to hear from community members who worry about their safety. And so I'm wondering what you know about any threats of violence.
Definitely. In the early days, so last fall, after they arrived, there were public execution orders that were being sent to locals around Richmond. They were receiving these death threats. And although they weren't signed, they couldn't be directly pinned to Ramona herself or any individual followers as such, as far as I'm aware. There was no doubt in the locals' mind that these were coming from Ramona and or her inner circle. So that's shocking. I mean, I can't really imagine what that must be like for them to be under threat or feel under threat in their own homes. So that was sort of the way that they first were introduced to this group. It's not a great first impression, to say the least. And so from there, things have sort of been more, I would say, on a little bit of a standoff. From what I understand, there's no sort of direct physical or any sort of altercations happening in the street, but there's this tension. There's this air of concern around Richmond, because every day everyone passes the school, and now, like I said, it's being painted this big purple. So it's right there in their face, and it's becoming clear that this cult is very much putting down roots. So it's very disturbing for a lot of people there.
And just how entrenched are they in that community? I'm wondering about town members who now are followers of Ramona.
Yeah, there's a couple of people in town who, I mean, of course, there's a suggestion that the man who owns the school and has owned it for several years, he's the one who welcomed them into the school and has continued to welcome them to stay there. So he and another person in town, and perhaps a few others, are sympathetic or not outright within the fold of the group. And so that certainly has raised tensions in town. There's neighbors who say, how could you let this group stay here? How could you welcome them here? How could you make them feel at home here, given what we know about them? So it's certainly caused a lot of tension and confusion and concern among people in Richmond.
Have they been able to gain any power over the town? I'm thinking about how there's we have elections across the province coming up in November, and I've heard grumblings that there's concerns of the impact they may have on elections. What's your sense of that?
When I first started looking into this earlier this year, it was around when I first started speaking with people in Richmond, the first thing people said was, did you know that they've been added to a land title, that Ramona and her followers have been added to a land title, and this means that they're going to be able to vote. Now, I'm no expert in Saskatchewan electoral policies, but people are concerned that this sort of official, giving them an official title to a piece of property gives them more rights in town and gives them the ability to potentially vote in the upcoming election. You'll have to ask Mayor Brad Miller if that allows them to run for office, town council, the mayor, that kind of thing in the fall. But there's certainly a concern that they now have the ability to vote. And that was the point of this person, this woman in town who wanted to add them to her land title. She wanted to give them a vote, and whether or not it was necessary for her to do that in order for them to be able to vote in the election. I think that's a question better asked to the mayor.
Yeah.
But that was certainly her impetus. She wanted to give these people some more power and more of a foothold in Richmound.
So what will you be watching for next in this story? It doesn't sound like they'll be going anywhere anytime soon. And we're going to hear from citizens who are quite concerned about this. But what exactly will you be watching for next in this story?
I'm very curious to see how the town will be dealing with its own bylaws and bylaw enforcement. There's an effort right now among locals to raise funds through a GoFundMe campaign for the town's legal fees to beef up its municipal bylaws. So I'm curious to know what the outcome of that will be. They're still in the process of raising funds. I'm also very curious to know what's going to happen with the election in the fall. Will there be any sort of tangible impact of these people being in town on the one hand and also being on a land title on the other? And I'm also very curious to see if there's any sort of escalation between this group and the people in town. Obviously no one wants anything bad to happen, but there's always this possibility. There's this tension, there's this concern. So I'll be watching that and hoping to hear from locals about how their day-to-day life is being impacted or not impacted by the presence of this group. And then again, I'm also curious to know, are they going to be staying at the school or are they going to hit the road again? There was several months where Ramona and her group were on a sort of royal RV tour across Canada. That was last summer. I'm curious to know if they're going to do that again.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time and thank you for your reporting on this story. Thanks so much, Rachel.
Thanks, Leisha. I really appreciate it.
That is Rachel Brown, who's a freelance journalist. Her Walrus article is called How the Queen of Canada and Conspiracy Theorists Splintered a Small Town. Now, there are many people in that community who are afraid to speak out for fear of their safety, and that includes our next guest. I spoke to her recently and asked why she thinks her community has been caught up in this.
Well, I never knew anything about her, had never heard of her until she arrived here. But then looking up things on the internet and reading news stories, discovering that, okay, she'd been out and about for about 2 years, going around the country in her RVs. It seemed to me that she was running out of places where she would be welcomed. The last place in Saskatchewan she got chased out of was Kamsack. The only place she could go with her RVs is in the driveway or on the side of the road where her followers might say, yeah, you can camp overnight at my place. Having a property like this, where there's a huge outdoor property and a huge building to turn into their command center. So, I feel like she had nowhere else to go. And Ricky was behind in the taxes on his building. And so this is kind of a win-win. Get the cult to pay the taxes and pay the bills for him. And it gave Ramona a place to hide out in the country and not have too many eyes watching her.
Why do they scare you? What about them and their messaging makes you nervous?
So the first thing that really worried me was when I learned from reading online about one of her followers, who's the deputy or whatever of defense, as she calls it, Frank Curtin, 2 years ago, I believe, descended upon the police station in Peterborough, Ontario, with a bunch of other followers to actually physically try to take down the police officers at that station. So, I mean, I don't know, did some of these people have weapons? But when somebody's willing to go to a police station because Ramona encouraged it and said to bring the space forces and whatever to take down the police because they're guilty of, I forget the word, but doing things related, enforcing COVID restrictions. I believe that was the line. So if you've got somebody that's willing to go and attack the police, and then her other followers regularly online are saying anybody who does something doesn't support Ramona should be executed, should be tried for treason and hung, and they put pictures of, hanging platforms and nooses and, so there some, who knows who's actually violent in this group and who isn't.
When you think about your community, you're obviously still living there. What do you see as the best case scenario? But also, do you think about the worst case scenario if these folks continue to call Richmound home?
Well, worst case scenario is somebody's going to snap and something's going to happen. I don't know. Who can say whether a local person will get so fed up that they'll go and do something, but willing to do something and end up going to jail to try to stop this problem. We have no idea if some of her followers might say, that's enough of this BS in Richmound, these Richmound people that obviously are inciting hatred against Ramona, let's go take them out. So I feel like, there's a valid reason for me to be worried that there's a target on my back because Ricky and his group at the school know who I am and they know that I don't support them.
Why is it important for you to still speak out? Like I said, we're not naming you because of your concerns, but why do you feel it's so important to share?
I feel it's important because it's killing our town. I don't think our village is ever going to recover from all the damage that has been done from them being here and stirring up and ruining relationships here. But it's not just about our community. And we said at the beginning, when there was the first protest, that we're just worried about the village of Richmond. We're worried about anywhere else in Canada and other places in the world for that matter, because she has followers, lots of followers in the States and in other countries. She's doing enormous harm to particularly vulnerable elderly women who seem to be lonely and are separated from their families. Ramona is scamming them. They send her their money and then they end up losing their utilities, get cut off. They lose their families because their families can't handle the craziness of it. They lose their homes because Ramona has told them they don't have to pay income tax. They don't have to pay their mortgages. And then when these people cry out for help to Ramona, oh, you said use royal decree number whatever, and she blocks them and doesn't respond to them. So she's manipulating gullible people and just spitting them out and leaving them out to hang to dry on their own.
I appreciate you speaking with me today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
That was a resident of Richmound. We agreed not to name her publicly because she says she fears for her safety. I'm Leisha Grabinski. You are listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1. Let's go to a caller who joins us right now, Dwayne in Carrot River. Hello, Dwayne.
Yes, I've been concerned about this problem for quite some time. Obviously, this woman is terribly mentally ill with grandeur illusions. I think we would have learned our lesson from Mr. Manson in California, Jim Jones, who managed to murder all those people with Kool-Aid down in Central America. I think that Waco, Texas was a very similar type of thing. Eventually, someone's going to deal with this in a wrong way, and there's going to be people get killed. And I don't understand why in a modern society like we have here in Canada, why we should make these people in this small town put up with her. She should have been, and I would even say not arrested, but picked up and taken to a suitable mental facility that can help her with her problems. I don't understand why anyone would think that this woman doesn't need help. It's very concerning.
Dwayne, thanks for picking up the phone and calling. I appreciate hearing your perspective on this.
Okay.
That's Dwayne in Carrot River. You can call us too, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email us, bluesky@cbc.ca. We are talking about the situation in Richmound. Ramona Didulo, who calls herself the Queen of Canada, came into town about 9 months ago, still there. And so we've been hearing from community members about what it's like to live next to the so-called Queen of Canada. We are going to hear from RCMP a little bit later in the show. We did talk to them in advance of this program, and so you'll hear that conversation for their take on what's been happening in Richmound, so stay tuned for that. But right now, let's go to Brad Miller, who is the mayor of Richmound. He's been listening to the program today. Mayor Miller, welcome to Blue Sky.
Good afternoon, Alicia.
So what's your take on the situation the community is facing with Ramona still in town?
Well, my take is 9 months too long, I think, but I would just like to ask a few questions of our government bodies. Like the first 2 or 3 months, we've had a lot of input, a lot of help, a lot of text. My council and administrator were just flooded with, and we still are, with how to do something, how to do that, let's get this done. But I'd like to ask the RCMP commissioner how it's okay to say not 1 bullet, but 2 bullets to the head for healthcare workers. If that doesn't make her look like she should be locked up or mentally health needed, then I don't know what. And that's probably from 99% of Saskatchewan people, and probably Canadians would like that answered. And then SUMA, very good people to talk with. And I talked to the CEO there, and he said whatever we want. But as just the mayor and taking over a place for my town and take care of the town itself, I would like to know, like, we were pushed to another lawyer, which cost us $15,000. And for a small village to raise that fund, that money is quite tough. So in the meantime, we were talking to a lawyer from out of province, and our bills were just increasing, so we had just shut it down. And MLA Doug Steele, he was really supportive at the beginning, and then winter came, and that's when everything seemed to just stop. And I haven't spoken to him for a while, and I just think that there's more out there that these people could be helping. Jeremy Tatzer, our MP, he reached out. We wrote a letter to him about a month ago and reached out to him, and he sent it on to the Minister of Public Safety, and he stated that we have to have more trust in our RCMP, which I do. But like I said, I'm an optimist, and because of my position, and that's why I am an optimist, I have to be. But I don't know why it's taken so long to move her out. And with Scott Moe, our premier, it's been 8 months, Scott, and we've helped you. Like, you have so many resources to help us out. And in our area, we voted for you for many years. And now Richmound is still hanging, and we're still trying to find out who can vote and what we can do. The federal government, well, that's another story. And Richmound and Village RM, we have a handful of people who are enabling Romana to stay as well. So that's my take, and it's a tough road for the council and my administrator.
Again, you sound emotional. How has her presence changed your community?
Oh, quite a bit. Our community was a bit divided before, which many communities are in the Southwest. But with 120 people in that area for our population, it sticks out like a sore thumb. We found out who really wanted her gone and who helped her stay. And there's a handful of people fighting us every step of the way. Like, for example, when we have our council meetings were interrupted, Ricky shows up, or some of the Fisher ladies will show up, and then they'll just keep on judging us what we're doing. And, you know, in a small town and village, there's lots of stuff that goes wrong, like infrastructure and water treatment plant. And that stuff is sort of on the back burner, which we try not to do as a council.
I want to share with people another conversation that I had with someone else who lives in the community. So I had a chance to speak with Gordon Ziegler. I spoke with him yesterday and asked what life is like.
Okay, it feels like we're living next to a dormant volcano. We know what they have been guilty of in the past with the insurrection in Washington, D.C. We know about their role in the convoy protest in Ottawa. We know of them trying to take over the police station in Peterborough. We're afraid of them. We live next to them, and we're afraid that the volcano is going to explode. And we're living with that every day.
So how do you navigate that? How do you go about your daily life when that's what you're living next to?
Well, I've heard some people say they're not going to dictate my life, and that's great. I don't know if that's whistling in the dark or not. We try to avoid them so that we don't go to that part of the community unless we absolutely have to. We're uncomfortable when we do go by the school and they're standing there taking our picture as we go by. We're uncomfortable when we see vehicles in the night going into and out of the property without lights on. We try to avoid that and pretend it's not happening.
How do you think this ended up happening to your community? What do you think it was about Richmound that enabled this to take root in your community? What do you think?
Well, it was an opportunity provided by the guy that owns the school, who said, "Come on here, I've got a place for you to live," after they got booted out of Kamsack.
What has it done to your community? Have people ended up wrapped up in what Ramona has been saying? Has it further divided your town?
Definitely has further divided our town.
And how? Tell me more about that.
People, some people at least, seem to feel the right to mistreat other people. We're losing our sense of taking care of each other.
Your community is so small to begin with. I'm trying to imagine what that's like, to have a community so small and a community so divided.
I agree. We are small and it is difficult.
What do you want people to know about the situation in Richmound? You know, I think it really came to a head back in the fall and was receiving a lot of media attention then. What do you want other people to know about what's going on in Richmound right now?
First thing is that they should understand that the Queen and her followers, and I use that Queen with quotation marks, that they're still here, because a number of people were under the impression that they had left for good. And of course they hadn't. So it's an ongoing thing. I would like people to know that. I would also like to express our frustration with any other levels of government or authority that we hoped would come to our rescue, I guess. And I'm including police, I'm including government. We don't seem to have been getting the help that we need to solve our situation.
What do you think it will take to get them out of town? If nothing's worked so far, what do you think it will take?
I'm really stuck for an answer, as we all are, because they're still here. What I would hope is some sort of a government decree saying that what they have been doing here with their online threats and things like that is illegal, and lock them up.
Do you feel safe most days?
No, I feel unsafe most days.
Has anybody left town? Have you considered leaving town?
Yes to both.
What would it take for you to leave? I mean, that's not an easy thing. I mean, I'm assuming you have a home and roots, right? That's not an easy thing to be contemplating, leaving.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And our roots are very deep here.
What would be a breaking point, do you think? And how far are you from that breaking point?
I don't know. I don't like to contemplate that.
Yeah. What is the worst case scenario? I mean, do you contemplate that? Do you think about what could happen? Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yes. A worst case scenario is that they get themselves elected to village council and start making their own rules.
Explain to people how that could happen.
They are becoming registered to vote. We have a municipal election this fall, as is common across our province, and they are getting the right to vote because they are being listed as property owners.
And then what? What would that mean for you if that were to happen?
That would mean that they could run for civic election. During our civic election, they could get elected. And then they would have legal authority to do whatever they want, to carry out some of the threats, I suppose, that the so-called Queen has issued.
I know you've had difficulty with different levels of government, with RCMP in getting them removed. But if you could have a sit-down conversation with someone who has some power, some authority, what would you say to them?
I would ask why it is legal for anyone to go online and threaten people with a bullet in the forehead and issue the threat that if we don't comply with her wishes, that threat will be carried out. I talked to a health worker about coming over here, and she said, I'm afraid to come over there. I inoculate people. The so-called Queen has threatened death to people who inoculate others. And I don't see why that is legal and why she can get away with that. I don't go online. I don't hear all the lies and threats, but I know they're out there.
That is Gordon Ziegler, who lives in Richmound. Our guest today is Brad Miller, the current mayor of Richmound. Mayor Miller, as you're listening to these residents share what it's been like for them, everybody's talked about the fall election. So how concerned are you about the fall election?
Well, I would be crazy not to say that we are concerned. The way our administrator has looked into it, and we've talked to SUMA, and SUMA has guaranteed us that they will never take over a town, but they're missing that they can still vote a person in that's living in town, a neutral person possibly that we don't know, that's maybe sitting in the background or whatever. So there's that. And then I looked into Alberta a little bit, and to vote in their province, I think you need to own a house or a property and pay taxes. And if that's the truth, then Saskatchewan has to update their laws for voting. Like, it's garbage if you can put on 20 people. And why I say that is we were looking into something like somebody else from the RM would buy a lot and they would put 20 on, and then another RM person would buy a lot and they would put 20 in, and then we'd win by rule of that they can vote, and they'd vote in who they wanted to. So to me, it doesn't make sense, and that's where I'd like SUMA to come in and tell our people of Richmond in a nice email that we can release to the village that this will never happen, and these are the things that we have to maybe look into. And in the meantime, like, we're bringing in our zoning bylaws, and maybe they got to look at their self and say, maybe our bylaws and all that, maybe we got to look at them too, because they're garbage. If that's the way you can vote somebody out in a civic law bylaw.
There's the politics and, of course, the policing side of this. And so we did reach out to Chief Superintendent Tyler Bates, who's with the RCMP. I had a chance to speak with him yesterday, and I asked, what happenings in Richmond have caught the attention of the RCMP.
Well, there's a number of incidents. I would say that it's been relatively calm over the course of several months, and really going back into in the fall when it escalated, I will say, into a particular incident that resulted in an assault charge against a particular resident in that community. I think the incident that involves Ricky Mans and a charge of common assault that transpired highlights the tension and the potentiality of conflict within that community. So we certainly don't want there to be vigilante actions against this group. We don't want there to be conflict amongst the residents and this particular group, and we certainly don't want to see an escalation into violence, which did transpire on October 7th, 2023, during an incident whereby a fellow by the name of Ricky Mans was charged with a common assault.
I do wonder what role the RCMP can play in removing a cult from a community, because that's what many residents want, right? They want Ramona and her followers out of their community. But that being in the community isn't necessarily illegal. So I just have some questions about policing. Like,
sure.
Do you classify Ramona and her followers as a cult? I guess that's my first question. But a cult, is a cult illegal?
Well, I would leave that characterization or that definition to the experts to comment on. At the end of the day, what the RCMP is concerned about is maintaining the peace and security within a community and within Richmond in particular. In this case, in terms of how we respond to that, you're correct in your assertion that we have a right to live anywhere we choose to live in this country. We have freedom of association, freedom to practice whatever beliefs or religion that we want to practice, so long as it is not impacting the safety and well-being, and so long as criminal offenses are not being committed in the process of exercising those freedoms. So that's the situation, I guess, that we're faced with right now is monitoring and assessing and making sure that the actions of this particular group do not traverse into the realm of criminality, and if in fact they do, then we need to be responsive to that situation. We need to make sure that nobody is in jeopardy, and that we do our utmost to protect the well-being of all involved, right? Whether it be the residents of Richmound, or whether it be Queen Didulo and her group that are in the midst of this conflict as well. So that's our priority. They certainly have a right to live and reside in that community, and there's nothing that the RCMP can do to prohibit that. We all have that liberty in this country. I understand that it might be upsetting to some that they have a presence there in a very small community, and that part of it is something that is nothing that we can respond to as far as that's concerned.
What about concerns?
Safety.
What about concerns that people who are associated with Romana have been recording community members? Is that illegal, to be taking photos, to be taking video of people in Richmound?
Well, it depends on the gravity. It depends on the frequency. There's a lot of elements that go into determining whether or not there is evidence of a criminal offense, right? So certainly, under the criminal code, there are provisions for criminal harassment that would constitute a criminal offense, and that would require a lot of repetition. A singular act of filming an interaction would not constitute criminal harassment. From my perspective, I can say that as incidents are reported, they are thoroughly investigated, and there's ongoing consultation with the Crown Attorney's Office as to whether or not that evidence that's gathered would constitute criminality. And at this juncture, there have been no charges laid outside of the singular charge of assault that took place in the fall involving Ricky Mans. So
how much time is this taking up, though, of the RCMP to have this? And we've been hearing from residents who are concerned, and it's been reported in the media that she has promoted violence. There have been threats of harm to politicians, to police. So I am curious just how much time this is taking up for officers in that area.
Well, it's beyond the officers in that area. We have specialized units, investigators in our general investigation section that have spent hundreds of hours gathering and analyzing evidence with respect to the reports that have been received from this particular conflict, this particular matter. As you can appreciate, when we're investigating online communications and the anonymity that is often an inhibitor to those investigations. They're very complex and technical in nature when we undertake these online communications analysis, and it's not in every circumstance that when you have online communications that it leads you to a particular person or group that you think it might. So at the end of the day, that's one of the challenges with respect to some of the reports that have been received, is we're dealing with the cyber realm, if you will, and online communications. And when you have tens of thousands of followers and associates of this particular group, it doesn't necessarily lead to the group itself, and those are the challenges. Are we dealing with threats that they're specific and that are uttered by a member of this particular group, or are we dealing with an anonymous person at a keyboard that is very challenging to identify? So that's some of the challenges that we continue to face, the complexity of the investigation. But I can assure you that hundreds and hundreds of hours have been spent in that analysis, trying to establish and develop grounds to substantiate criminal charges. And to this juncture, that has not proven fruitful. I can tell you that the investigation remains ongoing, and that effort remains ongoing. I can't get into the specifics of what those efforts are in order to protect the integrity of the investigation that's ongoing, but it is still very much an active investigation that is taking up hundreds of hours on the investigative front.
That was my conversation with RCMP Chief Superintendent Tyler Bates. Our guest on the show today is Brad Miller, the Mayor of Richmound. We are talking about the presence of the so-called Queen of Canada. Mayor, you were listening to the questions I posed to RCMP. I'm sure you've heard it before, but what do you make of some of the answers?
Well, I get it. And like I said, I'm an optimist, but I have to be in my position, like just for the people of my village. And I think, like I said, that one shot and two shot to the head is just offside. And like I said, 99% of Canadians and Saskatchewan people would be on my side, that she should be locked up. And also with the IP address where they're coming from, I think you still could go back to that household where it came from and follow that router or whatever. And you could, if it's a family of four, you could put them in each of the different room and then find out why they did it and who told them to do it. Like, that's just my thinking, whatever. I don't know.
What's at stake if she stays in your community?
Well, I just think, I don't know. We finally stood up as a village, and the RM people, ratepayers, they helped us out a lot too. And we stood up to them and to some of the bullies, and I'm looking forward as we're going to start healing if she gets out of here. And like I said, I'm just a small town mayor and our council, and we need help from the government bodies. They can't expect us to just sit back. And like I said, my kids have grown up and there's families in town with small kids, and they got to worry every day they get in that school bus if Frank Curtin or some of her other clowns are going to come into our town and do something, then it's too late. And then who takes a rap for that? I think it's got to be stopped and stopped soon.
We did get an email from a listener, Jan, who writes, have you had a chance to find out how this cult is funding themselves? RVs and trucks and paying the taxes on the school? And where is our premier? Oh, right, he has conspiracy theorists who support him, so why would he bother doing anything? This is just a travesty. No, our understanding is that Ramona Didulo's caravan is funded by donations from her followers, and some who are making pretty large monthly donations even while facing foreclosure. Mayor Miller, you've said a few times that you're an optimist, but what kind of rebuilding would have to take place to unite the community again if she were to leave? You know, are you thinking about that work? Is that even possible to bring the community together again?
Yes, I would like to say it's possible. And what it'll take is not, I always say this to the people, that it's not going to take the mayor and the council and administrator. I think it's going to take a combination of village council, the RM councillors, and people from the village and rural ratepayers to come together. The village council can't do it alone. And right now it feels like the village council and village administrator and ratepayers are just fighting the battle alone. We need that help from everywhere we can get it from. And like I said, there's 10% maybe that are against us. And the other 90 are still, you can talk to them, whatever. It's just, that's where we're standing at now. It's going to take a united front, I guess.
Well, I appreciate you taking some time to speak with us because like we said at the start, it's been 9 months, and so it was important to do an update on this story. So thanks for making time to be with us today on Blue Sky. I really appreciate it.
Can I leave with something?
Yep.
Like I always like to leave with some little bit of comic to it.
Go for it.
The owner of the school, when the teacher asks you what you want to be when you grow up, did you say a minister of national economic corridor? For a clown queen being at her beck and call to try to divide a village just because you don't want to pay your school taxes on your building you own. Don't forget the mayor and council before me gave you 2 years of free taxes, and myself and council gave you another free year. What more does a minister want? Free everything? And maybe they need a big red nose painted on the front of that school. Then they'll actually know that they're clowns.
Mayor Miller, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Brad Miller, the the mayor of Richmound. If you didn't get a chance to share your thoughts on everything you just heard on the show, you can always call our talkback, 1-800-661-7540. We'll be posting this episode on CBC Listen, so you can hear it on demand. And also the show will be posted on YouTube on Saturday morning, so you can find us by going to our CBC Saskatchewan YouTube page. Now, coming up on the next Blue Sky, to live in Saskatchewan is to know the wind. It shapes not only the land, but also who we are as people. And so we are going to talk about how the wind impacts almost everything. You can join the conversation between 12 and 1 right here on CBC Radio 1. Have a great afternoon.